Okay, welcome to the June meeting of the Southampton Village Planning Commission, first meeting of the summer. So, want to just report on a few items that we've been working on that are still have not been acted on yet, but are out there. First, there was a presentation by the consultant team. We selected James Lima and FX Collaborative at the trustees meeting last month, and they've made a proposal to us, which we're working on, and hopefully we will get that underway this summer, starting with meetings to begin to get some sense of both what the hospital's thinking and also interviewing local residents. I think everyone has seen the news in, I believe, the Southampton Press, or maybe it was Newsday, that the hospital has hired a team to start to work on the new building at the SUNY Stony Brook Southampton campus.
I think it was the Southampton Press. I remember reading about it.
So that's moving ahead, and that's going to be a major focus for the commission going forward, I think, as we work that out. Secondly, just several months ago, the sort of last piece of the comprehensive zoning reform that this commission has done over the last decade, I guess, we recommended some changes for the Hillcrest neighborhood, which was the one neighborhood which did not have the new zoning go into effect. Those are changes that would make it possible for people who have smaller lots to still be able to build, lots that don't meet the typical village requirements for a lot, and then bring them into the same zoning otherwise as the rest of the village. So we're waiting for the trustees to consider and come to a decision on that. So those are the two projects that we've been working on that are not finished. I think otherwise the commission hopefully is now done with the zoning reform, at least for a while, and give it some time to see how it's working as people are building houses around the village. So far, it certainly has not seemed to put a stop to people building houses. So people seem to be figuring out how to work through it. So today, we wanted to really spend our time talking about the drainage study. So just to go back again, I guess a little over a decade ago, there was a conversation among the then mayor and trustees about the need to address the drainage issues in the village, and particularly as they impact on Lake Agawam, and at the same time to address the issues that have been raised by the Suffolk County Department of Health putting a hold on all what are called wet uses within the village center. At the time, CMX Sammy, who was then the chair of the Planning Commission, went to a trustees meeting and said that he thought the first step was to put the zoning in place so that any development that a drainage plan would address would be controlled. And we undertook, I think Bob and Eduardo were on the commission at the time. We undertook a study with Aaron Krantz, Exton and Kuhn, and ultimately, after a 2-year process, that resulted in a new zoning regulations for the village center called the VB district, and design guidelines. That is a set of zoning that has won multiple awards on the East End. I think really a model for how to look at the village center long term. And after that was done, the then mayor asked us to look at drainage. And there were some studies that had been done at that time. This is probably about 5 years ago, really most of them commissioned by the Lake Agawam Association. And the village hired H2M to do a study, and H2M recommended a centralized sewer system at the time. The village ultimately decided, and we ended up, well, I guess first of all, we ended up deciding we were not ready. Also at the time, we were aware that the county was beginning to look at alternative technologies, so we wanted to see how that would result. And we basically put that study on hold. Since then, certainly wish I could say well, I guess I should say first of all, since then the village has been fairly aggressive in taking efforts to control stormwater retention, and there's been a tremendous amount of work done both on North Sea Road and on Hampton Road and on Windmill Lane, and now there's work going on, or I think work just got done, at least I assume that's why they were tearing up the street, on Job's Lane, the last, and so, but the issue of the sewer is, the sewage has not been addressed. Secondly, the state legislature is now allowing community preservation funds, a certain percentage of them, to be used for protecting freshwater resources. And third, I think the public awareness of this issue has risen enormously. I would say when we looked at this 5 years ago, the major issue we heard was cost. There was fairly moderate, at best, concern about drainage and about sewerage, and I think that's changed dramatically in the last few years. The mayor and trustees have asked us to reopen this issue, and that's been a topic of these meetings and workshops among the commission. And what we thought, like to some extent, like we did with the zoning and like we did with the village center, the right step would be to get someone to work with us who was not tied to a specific technology to help us parse through both the issues that we're trying to solve and what the best way to solve that. And then allow us to report back to the trustees. And I think this is also a process that's going to take a tremendous amount of public input. And that's both input by the property owners and the occupants of the buildings in the village center. Certainly input from the property owners around the lake. And then also generally the taxpayers and residents of the village. To try to come to a consensus we did not come to, I would say, 5 years ago, of the best approach. And I think one of the things that makes it difficult is, I think many of us, speaking for myself and others, and many people in the village think they know what the answer is. And I guess my general experience is every time I think I know what the answer is, I'm wrong. So I think the hardest thing here is going to be to try to hold ourselves back and try to address the issue before we decide we know what the answer is. And that's hopefully what this will get us to. And then hopefully when we come to the answer, there'll be some consensus about it because it was based on the issues of the lake.
Can't go wrong that way.
Right, right. Try to do it in reverse this time. I think last time we sort of found the answer and then try to figure out what it was going to solve.
Yeah.
I think we should first try to agree on what we're trying to solve, and then figure out what the answer or answers are. Jesse did a very valuable piece of work earlier for the commission, sort of summarizing all the studies that have been done. And one of the things I think we all thought reading those studies was there's probably ultimately not going to be one answer. There's going to be several answers to try to address all these issues. So with that, we put together a outline that grew out of a workshop meeting we had last month. And maybe we should walk through it and talk about it. And I'd like to get some consensus, at least among the commission at this meeting, if this is the right approach. And then, you know, we could go, then perhaps we'll go to the trustees at their meetings in July and talk about this as the next step moving forward. So, comments before. So, okay. So the goal here is to come up with a research and feasibility study of drainage and wastewater in the central village. Been trying to come up with a term that's a little more neutral about what we're trying to do and what areas might be included, and to identify and evaluate specific drainage alternatives within the village business district and Lake Agawam and village wastewater service implementations for various districts within the village. So I guess first of all, I think there's been a lot of conversation on the commission about what to include, and I guess also the point that many people have made that Lake Agawam is not alone in its issues. Certainly, every freshwater resource in the village faces these issues. That's certainly true in the town. The Southampton Press today has an article about Mill Pond.
And they're applying for money from CPF.
Right. Interesting.
$1.5 million.
Yeah. So this is a general problem. Part of the issue here, I think, is going to be to get this thing started and then figure out how it grows. Lake Agawam, while it's not the only one, is certainly the most extreme right now, and also one that I would argue has a direct impact on property values, both in the residential neighborhoods around it and certainly in the village business district. But part of the analysis has to be, what are we doing now that then can become a plan for the village as a whole? Effective water management will address long-term benefits of sustainability, density, public health, climate concerns, and business and tourism in order for long-term viability and vibrancy. So I think we came up with 3 goals: retain and reuse stormwater entering from the village business district and area adjacent to Lake Agawam to protect, preserve, and prevent further damage to the iconic freshwater resource. Secondly, rejuvenate and restore clean water by eliminating runoff, wastewater, and sewage entering Lake Agawam. And C, meet Suffolk County Department of Health standards for more diverse uses in village business districts.
Yeah, I have one question.
Yeah.
The people around Lake Agawam, we've got to understand that fertilizers and pesticides.
Correct.
That we had a gentleman come before us several years ago. There were 4 things. Number 1, road runoff. Number 2, the people around the lake. Number 3, sewage. And the 4th one is, what about the wildfowl, the geese that are coming into the lake? Those are the 4 things.
Right.
And I think the road runoff should be 1, the people around the lake, and how do they feel about it? We had a gentleman who was a caretaker on one of the estates. He said the odor is coming out of that lake when you get the right wind direction.
Right.
It's no longer prime property anymore. It's like being in Jersey when you go on the Jersey Turnpike.
Right.
And I think that's
Hopefully there's no one from New Jersey in this room.
and having spoken to the property owners myself, I think that some of them, I think what's key is a public-private partnership with those people, because I think some of the systems that they have are century old. So I think it's very important to say, hey guys, you're on the front lines, as you said, Bob. And I think we need to engage them again, and I think we have. I think try again until we can get some kind of a consensus. And I think we're on the right track, but I think more has to be done with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think getting the property owners around the lake involved and then having them be part of the
That would also include all the other
important.
property owners around all the other freshwater ponds we have.
Right.
But I think like Agawam is the worst because, as I just said, that was the first developed area around a water body. So I think
It's also the lowest point in the village.
exactly.
Yes.
That's the other.
Everything goes right.
Yeah, it's literally the lowest point.
Yeah.
Or are you going to say something?
I just had 2 things. One,
Right.
why is it called drainage study? I mean, who came up with the word drainage?
agree.
There's probably a better term.
could
I have no
I
pride
would
of
like a
authorship.
better term.
Okay.
I think we could call it, let's say, water
Water management.
pollution
How
control.
about water
Water quality
management? How
study?
about water and wastewater management?
Okay.
Pollution control, water pollution control.
Anyway, drainage study,
Yeah, okay.
people are gonna go, what?
Yep, okay,
Two,
yep.
I
the,
agree.
since the town is moving forward asking CPF for the 1.5 for Mill, have they done studies on Mill?
I think that's part of what maybe they're funding, but I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know the answer. It's a good question.
okay.
I know Mill Pond's been a topic of,
They've discussed this quite, for
I mean,
a
I
few
think
years.
the 3 ponds in the East End that are, or lakes, depending what you call them, that are most polluted are Lake Agawam, Mill Pond, and Georgica Pond. Those are the 3 in worse shape.
So with them moving ahead and asking for the
Right.
money, I'm sort of thinking underneath here, do they have a study? That's why they're asking for this sum?
Well, well, first of all, I think it's being asked by the town trustees, not
Right.
not a village
Right.
or body. So that's number one. Number two, it's also important to point out that
The town trustees
yeah.
not being like our trustees,
Yeah.
but, the trustees who control the
exactly.
water resources
and the
in the
other,
East End.
and which they have probably a bit more pull
Right.
than we do. That being said, CPF did pay for the drainage on Job's Lane, at least in part, Job's Lane and Meeting House. So they have given us some money in that respect. So
Well,
it
I
can-
was just curious about a study. If there's a study about Mill Pond,
I don't know. I don't know the answer. It's a good question.
Look at it.
One of the things, Jesse had wrote a list of articles and stuff, what to be
Right.
done. And one of the things that always bothered me is I want to know what the core samples are. I mean, sample the whole lakes, all the lakes, find out what is in there, how much soil is in there. Because the child growing up, seeing that brown water coming off all the fields, potato
Right.
fields, farming fields, all the
Right.
chemicals
Yep.
going straight into, how much of that stuff is in the bottom of the lake
Right.
or all in the ponds?
Didn't Gobler include
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah.
He did, didn't he? Because we
Yeah.
went through layers.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Gola
but
has
Did
it.
they do the whole lake or they do the just?
Well, I don't know.
I believe.
don't know.
I think he did, but again, I think that's what we want to find out.
Yeah.
So, right, that's
So we
part
need
of
to
the whole-
review his stuff.
Yeah.
I believe-
He's around and very happy to review it. I know they do updates from his class at SUNY Stony Brook, Southampton. I get all 3 names right. So certainly, okay. So that goes to the next point, which is review and research new and existing reports and studies. Studies by Chris Gobler, student of Stony Brook, Southampton, and drainage and wastewater programs by other East End and Suffolk County municipalities. I think one point is we want to learn from the other
Yeah.
towns and villages in Suffolk, both Westhampton Beach, which recently the plan, Sag Harbor. What's the village on the North Shore that just got a lot of money from the
Matatuck,
state?
I think it was. I
Yeah.
believe them.
What is it?
I think it was Matatuck, I believe. I'm not-
Right, and there's
Matatuck.
one near Huntington that just got a lot of money from the state. So there's a lot of people dealing with this issue.
Yeah, and, since we have a common cause, we all
Right.
have the same problem. Why don't we create some kind of a committee with members from all of these communities and bring them together
Right,
and
right.
create a board that will
Right.
look at the problem
Right.
for the
That's a good
whole
idea.
area
Right,
and
right.
then do those
Right.
solutions and then go after the monies in order
Right.
to solve the problem. Not just everybody's doing little
Right.
piecemeals.
Right.
I know,
And
I agree
we're
with
probably
you.
duplicating the efforts.
Right.
She just said, well, did they do a study? We
Yeah.
should know that.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, we should know.
and that study should be
Right.
comprehensive. That includes
Right.
a common cause
Absolutely.
for everybody.
Right.
I actually, since our last meeting, I actually reached out to, on a personal level, I reached out to Bob DeLuca from the group of the East End, not as a commissioner, but as a personal anecdote. And he had said that this is an issue, and I think he also said that most municipalities now are looking more towards decentralized plans. That's really where people are going because he said especially with our village, again, I did not speak with him as a commissioner for the record. He did say to me, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if you do X amount of sewage and have a plant then the end result could be detrimental because you are then adding so much flow to your system that even though your intentions were good, you end up with the same problem because you have all this extra density in the village. So that's one issue he brought to my attention that I just wanted to share with everyone.
Here we have the zoning in place.
Yeah, I think that's, again, I can't make the point enough times. That is a myth, it's an urban myth. We've already done the place, so that's true in a lot of villages where they haven't done the zoning, but in Southampton Village, we did the zoning to control the density. So I want to keep, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be in this group. I want to keep making the point that I don't want this myth to keep going on and on and on. We've controlled the density here. So it's not a density issue now. It's an issue of what the proper drainage is. I know that's what he thinks. I hear this all the time. Like, you're going to do this and then you're going to see 5-story buildings on Hampton Road. We're not going to see that here.
He's referring to the fact that if you have a certain level of flow, he understands that we did the study. He's saying that if we do this and we use our plan, it still could have a negative. It's still
well, whatever we do, ultimately, I think, and really because of from an environmental review point of view, you're going to have to do it anyway. You're going to create a plan, a wastewater plan, let's call it for now, that is capable of handling the full build-out of the zoning, because that's what the state will require anyway. So, in other words, if you now have, say, I'm going to make up numbers, which are not going to be correct, to make the point. If you have 200,000 square feet in the village now, and the zoning will allow you to build 300,000 square feet, then your plant or your alternative systems, whatever you do, by law, has to allow you to cover that 300,000 square feet.
I completely understand.
So that's the that's sort of the answer to his point, is you would actually create a flow that would deal with that, because that's what the environmental review would require. You can't do it based on what's Unit A.
Plus, that's only one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
I mean, there's so many other pieces to this puzzle, including the water goes into Lake Agawam. So that's just one piece of the puzzle.
Right.
But we have to do a comprehensive plan that handles all the pieces of the puzzle, not just one.
That would include all our parking lots. Instead of being a hard surface, they're going to be permeable.
It's got to be part of the solution.
Right, right. But you're right, there is, say, let's make it up for the minute. There's 100,000 square feet of more space that can be built.
Yeah.
Whatever it's done is going to have to consider that. But I think, again, what this village has done, unlike, I think, basically every other village on the East End, is we dealt with that before we did the wastewater.
And you know something? If we do a comprehensive study and we all group together, maybe we can show that kind of solution to the other villages as well.
Right, right.
That may have the same kind of
I mean, I
issue.
think this is what the other villages should be doing, which is control the density before you get started.
Yeah, but if you increase the wet usage of the area and have more restaurants, that means more parking.
Right.
And the question is, do we have enough parking?
Oh, you have plenty of
And then Moon is looking down at me and says, he's looking for that parking garage.
Yeah, plenty of parking.
I mean,
it's underutilized. That
yeah. I mean, the
We need
study
to stay-
showed you could take this parking lot
Yeah.
and have a third more spots if it was
Yeah.
properly organized.
I think Kimberly Allen
Right.
has mentioned
Right.
some plans for
Right.
very,
It's going to be a 5-story garage.
Yeah, but the thing about it is, you should see how they do parking garages in Florida. I walked by one, I didn't realize it was a parking garage for years, until all of a sudden I realized, hey, this is a parking garage.
Right.
It's like New York, they build all out of poured concrete, ugly as hell. And Florida, they build them to look like regular buildings.
Right.
well, but we need to focus
Right.
on the thing at hand.
Right. Okay, so to pick up on Joe's point, well, let's actually, let me just finish the other one. So, Creek Open studies, Lake Agawam Conservancy studies, the Nelson Pope and Voorhees management plan for Lake Agawam, a little out of date, but it has some useful information in it. The map and plan that CDM Smith and H2M did, again, I think there's stuff in there that's out of date, but they did a pretty comprehensive, just to your point in a way, They did a very comprehensive analysis of flow,
Yeah,
and that's probably going to be, I think, the most helpful part of that study.
yeah, I think so.
Is they did all the work that you would need to do to figure out, like, what is the flow today versus what it's going to be in the future. And actually, I think Mark at the time pointed out part of the problem with everyone wanted to use, our first thought at the time was, why can't we use the hospital plan? One of the problem is, if you take what the flow will be when you're fully built out, the hospital plan can't accommodate it.
No.
So,
you could-
right. So if you're going to do what you're talking about, which is really deal with what's the future flow, then you got to come up with an answer that deals with that, and that's one of the reasons the hospital plan
We
was.
can't control it. Didn't
Right.
HUM also do the study for Suffolk County?
Yeah, they also did the Suffolk County study.
Which is probably
Right.
even more complete.
Right, and then there's a few other studies out there. And then, just, again, because I'm trying to sort of suggest maybe we first figure out what the issues are and then find the answers. There's obviously, there's the traditional sewer system, let's call it for now, with a separate treatment plant.
Right.
There's then what we call cluster systems, although that's shorthand for a lot of different alternatives, which Joe points out, other towns are now looking at,
Yeah.
and some of them are beginning to use. And so for each of those, I think, sort of like we did with the zoning, is we're going to need to set up a matrix that looks at capital costs, operating costs, and financing options for each of them, because each of them are different. And some of them are publicly owned, some are usually privately owned with public incentives, so they really vary in terms of how they're administered.
I believe with a centralized system, you'd have to go forward with a referendum.
Right.
And I think with the clusters, it's more privatized, so it wouldn't have to go through the long public process in the same way.
Right, depending on, so one of the issues I think in this is, so there's two ways to do those.
Yeah.
One is you say we're going to basically voluntarily try to get people in the village to do this, so get a group of businesses, for example, on Job's Lane to get together and do it. The other way to do it is you actually set up a district and say everyone in that district has to do it within a certain period of time. So if you do the district, it's actually the district that requires the referendum.
Yeah.
So you might have a referendum anyway, but the referendum would not be about
Small group
the
of-
bonding,
yeah,
right?
It's 5
Right.
property owners versus
Right,
3,000 people.
correct, exactly.
But I
exactly
think,
right.
I think commensurate with either of those two,
Right,
that long-term effectiveness is really critical.
right,
Right.
right. And so that's the next point is what are you, again, linking, what are you trying to solve with what's the right
And
system?
we are planning.
Right,
Right, exactly.
right.
That's-
So we're
exactly.
not just today.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, that's exactly, I think you hit it on the nail, that we are the planning commission.
Yeah.
And we should look at where is the village going and where it's going to be in 20 years
Yeah.
and how we're going to handle the growth.
Yeah.
And it's for me, there's.
I mean, it's critical.
It's critical that there is a a centralized wastewater system.
Well, it's
for
just
the
But that's the
critical
answer
that-
before the question.
Well,
So-
Well, we just-
But
You may turn out to be right, but
But-
let's try to, I think for us, we're going to have to hold ourselves back a little bit
Right, okay.
and let the issues
By
sort of,
centralizing
Well,
municipalities and
Yes.
private.
Yes,
That's what it
exactly.
means.
So
That's what I
item
mean,
D of
decentralized, we need-
3D should be A, and then A, B, C comes after
okay,
that.
you're right.
So Bob, you're in plumbing. What do you think of the whole process?
Well, yeah, I've been on this board a long time. I've heard all the different scenarios
Yeah.
about the thing. And one of the things that we also have to keep in mind is the village is going to grow. The outside district is developing.
Right.
And I look at what the town is doing to County Road 39, which is an absolute disaster, compared to what we're doing, is we're going to become the commercial hub of the outskirts district. So we are going to get more pressure on us as far as usage of the village and also parking. So these are the things we also have to look at in the long range. I think some of the things that's controlling the runoff going into the lakes, the people around the lakes, and then the last thing is the sewer district. Now, we had Bill Chaliff come before us,
Right.
and he suggests us going with a pressurized system, whereas you have just a 2-inch line and you just pump into a main line and you pump everything back to the main sewer system. The only problem about that is if you lose power, nobody has any bathrooms.
Right, right.
That's the problem of having.
Well, what if you have a generator?
If you have a generator, you're in luck.
Well,
Because if
so-
you look around the surrounding communities, like I look around Florida, and they've got these central pumping stations with backup generators
Yeah.
to keep going.
Right. So that's part of it.
Now, I think I was in City of Fort Pierce, and they have a pumping station, but then they have, in these large buildings, they have an outside electrical jack
Right.
where the city can come around with a truck and pump this collection pumps
Right.
into the sewer plant. But that gets to be a involved situation.
Talking about
Gotta have a
other
fleet.
areas, I was just at the P3 conference, which is a public-private partnerships, actually most directed towards wastewater in California. And there it's amazing how they're putting centralized wastewater system everywhere, and actually all the wastewater is actually being resold as recycled water
Yeah.
for
San Francisco has a high pressure, I think it's 6,000 pounds pressure. Now,
yes, and
there
they-
is a very
they use
similar.
blue pipe. Actually, it's a third pipe in the ground, but it's for blue pipe for
If you want to see somebody recycling water that way, the laundry up on County Road 39 next to McGee Street,
Right.
they have a system in there where they reuse their water. They send it through these
Right.
high pressure. And I was talking to the manager, it cost them $250,000 to get this thing serviced when they have to. And the water goes in gray, comes out crystal clear when it comes back out.
Yeah.
But it's under extremely high pressure and goes through filters, and they can reuse the water again.
Now, aren't some
I
people
don't know about
do?
reusing, but
Right.
they're reusing for landscaping. Or
Right.
Yes. In
For
Florida,
golf courses, things like that.
the water
yeah.
mains, I think
Yeah.
they're purple. They use it for irrigation. They also use it for golf clubs and stuff
Right,
like that.
right. Which obviously means you're not taking it out of the aquifer.
No, you're not pumping into the
Right,
ocean because,
right.
And you're not pumping it in the ocean.
Right,
yeah,
right. I
but there
know.
was a study done by New York State and Suffolk
Right.
County in 1958 and 59. And the biggest problem that we face on Long Island is losing our fresh water
Yeah,
supply
yeah.
because they're pumping it out in the ocean instead of going back in the aquifer.
Right,
Not a
right.
good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. So, so long-term effectiveness, we said, based on population growth, sustainability, density, climate concerns. I think one of the things I think we much more aware of now is whatever plans we come up with, we have to deal with, you know,
The raising sea
more heat year-round. You know, if you think about, Joe probably knows this, but Joe and Bob know this a lot better than I do, but years ago in the village, the lakes would freeze all winter, right?
Yes.
They literally would freeze for 3 months.
Yeah, you-
Now, I think
I
this
skated
winter,
on-
did Lake Agawam ever freeze this winter?
No.
I
I've never seen
skated
Lake
on-
Agawam
I
freeze, ever.
skated on
Yeah.
Lake Agawam.
I bought a snowblower.
yeah.
I bought a snowblower 2 years ago. It's still in the box.
Right. So that obviously has an impact on drainage and, you know, some of the things that used to help
Yeah. Old
our
Town. But
freshwater
they did on
resources is
Agawam
things would
for a
like
couple
get
years. They did some
frozen for a while.
I don't ever remember.
Certainly, the rising
towards the beach
tides
club.
because of the ocean is
I
going to
can't
have an
remember
impact. You
where
know,
I
people talk about pumping out into the ocean like it's the same ocean it was 100 years ago,
No.
but
No.
the ocean's a lot higher now.
full plastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, all of that is, we need
And
to take
Viking
into account.
cruise lines are dumping in the ocean.
Right.
Carnival.
Yeah,
Carnival, whatever.
Yeah, getting fined. And business and tourism, you know, one of the things I think just, you know, in my other life, I mean, one thing we look at a lot is how younger people are looking at the world. And environmental issues are really becoming really interestingly important in what they choose.
Yeah.
Where they choose to live and shop and everything else, and that's something that I think the East End's really going to feel soon. And the other thing, interestingly enough, is again, and how we look long term is car ownership is declining rapidly, and so that's going to have an impact for us to stay competitive. We're going to have to deal with that. And so all of those are part of it. And then finally, you know, the issue I keep bringing up, maybe because of my own status, you know, there's the demographics of the village are aging, and providing housing alternatives for that component of our population, I think is going to be increasingly obvious.
You
Something we need to do.
You know, the hospital population
Right.
would be a good
Yep.
example. They had
Right.
a portion of that
Right.
be senior housing or something. of that
Right.
nature.
Right.
Well, the project up on 39 apparently has got money, and
Right,
they're
right.
going to be,
But I mean, one
they
thing,
got some push there.
yeah, one thing I think is going to happen over time, and is already starting to happen, is people who are doing that are going to want to be able to walk.
Sure.
And so,
Or shuttle, or
Right, right,
something,
right,
you know,
right.
yeah.
so those are all things I think, you know, to take into account. And what I'd like, sort of like we did with the zoning, like Linus did with us, is have someone else put together a matrix that we can look at. So it's not really our bias, but rather some outside person who doesn't have an economic stake in it saying, these are what your options are and this is what each of them mean.
So we'd have to do an RFP again, like
Yeah,
Right,
what we did for
right.
the hospital?
I think so. There's a lot of expertise. There's a lot of expertise in the East End now about that.
That really is, yes.
A lot more than there was, and there's a lot of expertise certainly on the island, New York
And certainly we
State.
could direct them to investigate the other villages
Right.
and towns that are doing this.
Right, and then in terms of what the planning commission does, what we do for a living, sort of, is, you know, ultimately, you're going to create some type of district, if you will, within which certain things are going to happen. I think one of the things that's different from what we looked at 5 years ago, and sort of looking at all the reports that have come out, and certainly when we had that meeting 6 months ago, whatever, when you're going through like the percent of each, you know, including Lake Agawam is very important because we know the use of fertilizer around the lake, as you said, the age of the septic systems around the lake. Any answer is going to have to include that. I think some of those property owners have been very good about doing that. Some are very interested in doing that, and others will not want to spend a penny. So we're going to have to come up with a district that encourages good behavior.
However, now grants are available regardless of income.
Right.
People can get them. So
Right.
Paul, did anybody look at Meadow Lane that goes down between the bay and the ocean?
Right.
All those houses down there, they're
Yeah.
all going into the bay, Shinnecock Bay.
Right.
all those new houses, however, have to have the new systems, the new IA systems.
Yeah, but there's a lot of
Yeah, I
pre-existing.
I understand that, but
Right.
I'm just saying that they are now mandated to do the new systems,
Right.
new construction.
So, Mark, one thing I wanted to ask you, so some of the people in the village have been doing, like, I think the Village Latch property is going to do its own system.
No,
They
the
are.
Village Latch,
How do those work?
the Village Latch was able to basically get approval with regular septic systems.
Uh-huh.
And then voluntarily, they decided to say, no, we'll put the IA systems. But those IA systems, yeah, so they're...
That's what we have at Business Pond.
Yeah, you have an IA system. And so what's just for the people who are watching this at home, and for me, who's not a scientist, what's an IA
So
system?
basically, in a regular septic system, the waste goes onto a tank, and normally there's like 2 compartments in that tank,
Right.
and there is a digestion that happens into the tank, and there is this natural digestion with the bacteria, and the water comes out, and actually the water comes out pretty clear. And an IA system is a very, very similar system, but with the only difference is that you add some pumps into that tank, and you add air, and then the bacteria are then strengthened by the air and the
It's
oxygen.
aerobic and anaerobic bacteria
and
you're
that-
talking about.
All right, and then they started to, they just filter, eat each other better, and then so you have more treatment. But in terms of scale, let's say that the scale of a regular septic system, if the scale is, let's say, 40, if you reach an IA system, you get maybe 4 times the denitrification system. But with a centralized plant, it's going to be like 15 times.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's another dimension. When you have a centralized plant, you can actually bring it back to potable water standards. You know, and then one of the things is that both the septic system and the IA systems do not deal with the pathogens. They don't deal with real
Right.
disease or anything
Right.
like this. But these, they all go on both systems. They'll go right through it. Whereas when you have a centralized system, it does deal with the pathogens.
Right.
Interesting.
The other question was raised here in our planning commission is where to put the plant.
Right.
Right. That's the number
Or
one.
plants, or plants if you have multiple systems.
Well, the thing about it
Right?
is,
Either way, you have to figure out where
I've
you're
worked
doing
in two
this.
plants, the Southampton Hospital plant
Yeah,
and the Southampton Rehab.
right,
And the hospital plant is a very, very old system.
right.
And you go to the one in the rehab center, it's like night and day. It's like
Right.
rocket science.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I think the location of the plant is really the crucial element to start to design the system.
Yeah, but wherever you put the plant, you're going to get resistance from the neighbors around it.
So
Because
the
the first thing they're going to say is the odor, we don't want the plant in our neighborhood.
Right. I mean, the odors now is minimal. It's just
Yeah, I understand
minimal,
that.
but
They've improved the plants tremendously.
right. Tremendous. I mean, one location that I thought would be next to the cemetery on the town side. You know, right next to the cemetery there's a very nice piece of property, and that would be a great property.
That was the old Edwards farm up there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Right there, so it's really a great property. It's close enough to the village. It's not in the village, but it's close enough that with stations, with a couple of pump stations, we could easily reach, and then we could then use the irrigation to irrigate the cemetery or.
Right, and if you do
Okay.
alternate systems, you have a smaller version of the same issue, which is you got to figure out where you're going to put those.
But the smaller system.
You could put those in the parking lots, right?
Right, but one of the issue with the smaller systems is that it's in terms of financing. You can't really finance those
Right.
little smaller systems.
Well, plus
Whereas
the-
when you have a large system that's going to deal with a nice population,
And you can add on.
you can add on and you can you bond it, you get financing.
Right.
You can do a private-public partnership. You can do, there's ways to
The parking lots, isn't the water table just, I mean,
exactly right
how
there.
do you deal with that?
That's the hard part.
Well, I-
That's the hard part.
Well, I do know that the trustees were approached by the 9 Main Street, and 9 Main Street is putting in they did put in an IA system.
Huh.
So
Where's that?
Nine.
next door.
No, I
Right next door.
understand. Right now, that's the only solution
Right, right.
that you have on the small.
But I'm just
But
saying.
it's a glorified
I'm just saying.
septic
I'm just saying it's being done already. It was put in
Right.
this past winter, so it's not like
Right.
it's not being done.
Right.
It's being
No,
done.
the IA systems
Who
are.
put it in?
The two doors down. The new second floor on the.
Yes, the second
Yeah.
right down here.
Yeah.
I just
Right.
saw the second floor.
Oh, right, this way. I'm thinking the other way. I just realized what you meant. That building over
I'm
there.
sorry. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Used to
that
be
building that way. Yeah.
Five and dime store. They just put a
Yeah.
second floor on
Yeah,
it next
yeah.
to
Is
the
that
Forward
that new
Pharmacy.
project that they were doing?
Yes.
Indoor mall? No, not that one.
No, this is next to the corner building.
That used to be Corwus Pharmacy.
Yeah, the corner building's becoming One Kings Lane, and then
Yeah,
the building
yeah.
next to that.
Yes. Exactly.
Right.
So. and
Corner of what?
There's no corner.
Job's in
it's
Maine.
one in from the corner.
Job's in Maine.
Right, right.
It's
Oh,
one. It's one in
okay.
from the corner. It's one
Right.
building in from the corner.
Yeah.
You heard that Pottery Barn's going away.
No, I didn't.
Yeah,
That's
they're
surprising.
leaving.
But the other element is that in terms of regulation, with the health department, because we have so many small lots in the village, we are not allowed. There's no the allowable flow that
Right.
you get on those small properties
Right,
is minimum.
right.
It's minimum. And you can't really develop it. We were trying. Somebody was trying to do a pizzeria and couldn't even get approval on a pizzeria on a small lot because you don't get the flow. Whereas when you have and this is valid whether it's an IA system or a septic system. But once you have a centralized system, a wastewater plant,
Right.
then at that point that limitation goes away.
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue with the alternate systems that we
Right.
need to figure out,
But again,
without making a judgment call either way, is
No, we have to
if
weigh
you
it.
do the alternate system, assuming it's not going to be voluntary, because if it's voluntary, you sort of
Well,
let me
sorry.
finish. So if it's not voluntary, what we're going to have to figure out is how do you cause someone to do it if they, from an economic point of view, right? So let's say you have a property owner who's a remote property owner on Hampton Road, for the sake of argument, and they say, I don't want to do this. How do you get them to spend the money? And so those are the answers with alternative systems and what we're going to have to figure out. Like, how do you get, because in alternative system, you're really relying on people to do the right thing, right?
Well, that being said, I think when the county came to speak to the trustees,
Right.
they did say that there are systems now, clusters that can handle up to 30,000 gallons per day. Now, that being said, to what degree does the property owner want to use his or her property? Do they want to convert their second floor back to a
Right.
living space? Do they want to
Right.
have it as an office?
Right.
So, and I think the alternative systems would allow them to do that.
Right, right, correct.
I don't
correct.
think we make the decision, Joe.
No,
Right,
I'm
right.
not saying.
Okay.
I'm not
I
saying
think we presented.
What I'm trying to do is just come up with
Can I
issues.
just-
So the issues on both sides is, if you do a centralized system, the benefit in theory, I guess, is that you can bond it and it's financially efficient. The problem, it has a big capital cost up front, right? The issue with the alternative systems, they don't have that capital cost, and therefore in some ways are easier to get done. But then the issue with that is, how do you cause them to happen, because you by nature are going to have to get groups of property owners to do
Exactly.
And I think
The
Can I ask
question,
you
go
a
ahead, Bob.
question?
Since,
I just want to mention, because when you get absentee landlords,
it. Right.
and
Which we
I'm
have a
thinking
lot
about
of.
a certain place on Windmill Lane and Hill Street, right?
Right.
He's an absentee landlord,
Right.
right? The building was falling apart.
Right.
He has rents that are outrageous. That's the type of guy that's not going to conform.
Right.
And then there's certain maintenance factors to be done with these things.
Right.
These guys are not going to spend the money. They don't live in the village. All they're looking for is to collect the rents, and they could care less.
absolutely.
So I don't think we should look at that, because we have an awful lot of absentee
Well, we have to look at it.
landlords.
So I think those are the issues we want to look at and study and say, so, and look, it may be that other villages have solved this problem.
I was just
Right,
going to
how to use
ask,
the alternate
how is
system.
West Hampton Beach going to do their long-term financing for their new thing?
they're only doing. I think it was 60,000 gallons they're only doing per day. They're not doing a huge, massive.
How are they
turnover.
paying for it, is what I'm
No,
asking.
The
they're
way-
they're going into an existing plant.
Right.
No. How are the people using
They're
this?
doing a traditional sewer district.
Right.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they're going to get a sewer bill. Is that right?
Yeah.
No, the way it works typically
Right.
is that when you develop a sewer district, there is one is called a benefit assessment, meaning that anybody who owns a property where the sewer is available gets a benefit assessment,
Right.
whether it connects or not. Then the second one is, once you connect, then there is a connection charge. So then at that point, if you decide to do a wet use, there's a connection charge. And then the third revenue stream is typically from the water. There's a whatever water you
It's
use.
based on the water meter, and how
On the
many
user.
No,
users
I
you use.
understand, because I've lived in a place that has this. So water in, water out.
Right.
Right.
And that's the bill. I
Right.
mean, we all get
there
Suffolk
is an
County, we all
assessment.
get Suffolk County water bills,
Right.
don't we?
Right.
Yeah.
So water in, water out.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think
And
one
it's
of the
usually the same.
One of the things that I think we would ask in the study is whoever's doing the study to look at how other towns and villages are handling these alternate systems.
Long-term
Right, because
paying for it.
people are doing it, so they must have some answers.
Right.
Like,
Use-
how are you doing it?
The usage
Right.
charge is normally, it covers the maintenance and operation. That the usage charge but the capital cost is
Well, that's-
covered by normally a benefit assessment owned by the people who are going to
Right,
use it, or the overall community.
And generally you bond,
right,
because that's such
Bonds,
economically efficient.
right, right.
Right, you bond some piece of it, you're getting grants or whatever for the
Right.
others. I mean, I think what West Hampton did, other than the fact they were using, I mean, they had obviously the great luck of having an existing plant at the airport, but what they did was a fairly traditional approach. But again, there are all these alternate
Okay.
systems out there, people are using them. I think the part of the study is how are they doing it. So, we have only our knowledge here. I think the purpose of this in part is there's a lot of activity in the world, and it's really helpful to understand it.
So I would say let's do two things. number one, let's try to engage the property owners
Right.
who actually own businesses, or who actually own property, at least those of whom that we can actually get into
Right.
a room,
Right.
or their property manager, whomever, to their representatives. Number two, let's take a second look at our zoning plan, and let's maybe apply these systems as well as the municipal thing. Let's apply these new technologies to that plan that you all did 5 years
How
ago.
would you apply them? What are you thinking?
I'm saying you guys did a plan 5 years ago based on a sewer.
No.
I'm
No,
saying
no, not based on sewer. So let's
based
be.
on zoning. You did based
Yeah.
on.
It's not based on a sewer.
Yeah, it's based on, so what we did is we said, okay, so,
Based on the
let me go
community.
through the plan for a second,
Wanna keep
and I
it
would
down.
encourage people to read it. So there is a plan, and what it shows is 2- and 3-story buildings on obviously on Main Street and Joe's, but we took those 2- and 3-story buildings and said, that's what you could potentially build on Hampton Road and on
No,
Windmill Lane.
I understand that.
Right, and that created a certain density.
Right, correct.
Right, and that's the density that is currently permitted in the village, which was a fraction, by the way, of the density that was available before.
Right.
So the density under the old zoning was like here, and we brought it down to here.
Right.
And then what it also said was, if someone had done a 3-story building next to you, you were not going to be able to do a 3-story building. So it managed density so that around the block, you wouldn't have all 3-story buildings. You'd have basically a split of 3-story buildings and 2-story buildings. Obviously, somebody might decide to just want a 1-story building, but that was the limit. That created a density.
Right.
That density is what's permitted. It doesn't call for use. It just is zoning. So it just says within that zoning, any use that's permitted in the village business district is permitted. That's retail, office,
Residential.
Because
and institutional use.
Because what I'm getting at is when there was an issue with the courtyard, that was an issue that the public, some people in the public were not thrilled with, and I think that's where that plan kind of had some issues because people were missing the open space that was the courtyard. And I think that's the key issue there. Is it things that need to be addressed with the streetscape, and I think that was an issue the public was concerned about.
Right, and that's the purpose of public review. But I'm not sure in zoning, you can't in zoning say that because, unless you're going to condemn the site, you can't in zoning say that we're going to take any place in the village business district where currently there's space not built on it, you can't build on it,
Right.
without it being a taking.
Plus that courtyard was a dead zone.
But whether it was a good or bad thing, it doesn't matter. But the point is, from a zoning point of view, that's not a zoning issue, really.
Yeah.
That's a public review issue, and the public obviously stated very strong opinions about that open space. But that's not an issue of zoning. That's an issue of, just like if you bought a modern building to the ARB, they could say, we don't think that's the appropriate
Because
building for that business
well,
district. It's not
yeah.
zoning.
Because what I'm saying is that the property owner brought a plan forward, and that plan was then rejected by the public.
Right?
But the plan, according to the representatives, was congruent with what the guidelines were. So I'm just trying to say, how do we square the two? If we, I don't know if we can.
Well, the difference between zoning and public review of particular projects. So let me actually use a good example of the way that project didn't reflect the zoning. So the zoning called for breaks in
exactly my point. Yeah.
in the building.
Yeah.
So if they had followed the zoning to the letter, they would have had a passageway between themselves and the building next door. They decided not to do that.
Right.
And I think that's part of what caused the issue in a way.
Exactly.
But the village center zoning calls for that. And if you read the design guidelines, the design guidelines said if you do buildings of this scale, you should have passageways in between. They chose not to do it.
Right.
That was not flagged for whatever reason in the initial review. And when it got to the boards noticed it, and the public noticed it, and the project didn't proceed. So
Yeah.
that's the way zoning's supposed to work.
I'm just saying it was represented as something that was taken from a page from the guidelines.
I can't control what people say,
Yeah, I know,
right?
I'm
Right,
just-
but just understand,
yeah.
if they had really followed it to the letter, they would have shown on either side, that the design guidance didn't tell you which side to put it on, but on either side, you would have had a
Right.
passageway.
Okay.
And that would have, I think, ameliorated the public view at least.
Certainly would have, I think. yeah.
Right, but all I'm saying is, from an analysis point of view, we know how much, and in fact, the H2M study used the zoning to come up with what the potential,
The size of the plant and everything.
and how much was the full flow that was needed?
300,000 gallons, something like that.
Yeah, it was something that's
150,000, I think.
That's ringing
Yeah, it was
bells.
100.
Right, I think it was
But it was
150,000
very
was the
limited.
potential
It was
flow.
very
Yes,
small.
it was
So
small.
It was small. So I think that the plan that we should try to consider would be a greater area to try to make it a slightly larger.
Well,
And that would be, so if you were looking at alternate systems, you would say, if it's 180,000 flow, right, just for the sake of argument, then the alternative systems put together would have to manage that flow.
Yes.
Right, that's, I think, what the study should do, is say, let's assume that, and then for the alternatives, how do you get to 180,000 of flow?
And you have these 5 districts, or 5 potential districts.
Well, potential
exactly.
districts.
You have five districts.
Yeah, I
Very hard
mean-
to manage.
Yeah.
And as you know,
Well, or, you know, the idea before, and that may not be the right idea anymore, was you would start with a smaller district and then grow it.
yeah.
Whether that's the right thing or
Well,
not, who
you
knows?
could see some reasonableness about a couple of these districts being together. You know,
Right.
like, you know, I mean, rather than have 6, you could have 3.
Right.
I mean, shouldn't it just be one sewer district?
Could be,
Exactly.
yeah,
Could be
yeah,
one also.
yeah, yeah.
The simplest, simpler the better. And for
It
right.
would be easier just
So
to
it's
have
easier
one.
to
to
manage.
have one, exactly. I mean, I
expand it.
think that if we were able to come up with a good location for the plant, and I think that maybe work with the town.
Behind your house.
NIMBY.
great site.
There's a really good site on Willie
So
Street.
we'll let you know.
Yeah,
We
NIMBY.
work it over.
I like your idea on 39. I think
On
it's
39,
perfect. I mean, a lot of dead
right
bodies,
next to
they're not going to care.
Right next to Burger King. Between
Well,
Burger King
the
and-
village owns also property of a Saponic Road, don't they, across the street from Tuckahoe School?
You mean the
Yes.
shooting range?
That's,
Yeah, the shooting range.
yeah.
Yes.
That's where the
Well,
old radar
but that's-
station used to be during the
Yes,
Second World
exactly.
War.
That's kind of
Again,
weird. The town
With all due
has some
respect,
of that
everyone, we're
for
coming up
affordable housing and
but for,
people behind.
Yeah, but
With
that's,
all-
a lot of it's swamp up
um,
there.
Yeah.
with all due respect, we're coming up with the
I'm
answer
sorry.
before we figure out the
I
issue.
know, see, that's the
That's a long
thing.
pipe, Rob.
Yeah,
I'm
so
trying not to
we'll
do
stay
that.
focused on what actually
I
trying
like
to do.
behind his house. I think that's a good answer.
Me too.
No, but seriously, I don't, at this point, I think, I don't know enough about the alternate systems to fully understand that.
I
I'm
don't
hoping
either.
that's part of what comes out of this.
Yeah.
And I think the issues we're dealing with, lots of people are dealing with now, right? I mean, when you were looking at it, I mean, villages all over Suffolk County are,
Yeah.
we're all, I mean, unless you're in one of the existing sewer districts in western Suffolk County, I guess, but everyone in eastern Suffolk counties, we're all dealing
Well,
with this.
you know, it's just ultimately going to come down to, what I'm hearing is volunteering for your, you know, the cluster systems, and everybody volunteers to connect.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Or, but the issue
Not
is
if
if you
you- not if you
require,
have a sewer
so I guess the thing that I'm trying to get in my head, and that's why I think it's interesting to do a study, because you learn what other people have done, is, so I know that, you know, from a traditional point of view, when you do a central plan, you bond it, and then people pay the bonds, is basically what's happening. That's what the charge is for. So I understand that, right? That's in my head. What I don't know is when you do alternate systems, since you're not financing a central plan, how do
That's right.
you finance it? And I guess my
Maintenance.
concern is,
Maintenance.
if you rely on property owners to finance it, you have some very good property owners, and you have other property owners
That's
whose
just what I
attitude's
just
going to
said.
be,
That's what I
I don't
just
spend the
said.
money. So you
That's what I
can't
just said.
volunteer it. You gotta.
That's what I
But
just
there may
said.
be mechanisms other people have found, right?
However, I think if they were told, if you did this, you could have more uses, possibly, they may be more
Yeah,
impatient to
but
do.
Joe, I've, as a landlord and seeing what other landlords do,
Yeah.
you're gonna, Paul brought a very good, you're gonna get some landlords that won't spend a dime. All they do is collect as much money as they can get out of that property and just run that thing right in the ground.
That's like Boeing with their airplane. I mean, come on.
You know, it's a little bit, why don't we rely on property owners to build streets? Because,
You can't.
because the benefit goes beyond just them, right? So they're benefiting from the street, but if they build the street, they're gonna say, well, you know, I live on Tolsom Lane. If I want Main Street, I have to pay a fine, right? So whatever we do in the Central Village, the problem's gonna be if I'm property owner A at the corner of, you know, Hill and Windmill Lane, I'm gonna say, wait a second, I'm paying for drainage for everybody, but Paul on Tolsom Lane's getting the benefit of that because his lake is cleaner. So why am I paying and why is he not paying? That's always what's so difficult about these things is the benefits go beyond just
That's why
that
there's
person.
That's why there's
And
government.
no one ever wants to pay for that in this country, right? No, everyone wants to pay only for their own
That's why there's
benefit.
government, come on.
That's why there's government. So that's the hard. But again, I think what I want to caveat is, as Joe is saying, it is correct. Other people are using these alternative systems, so they may have figured that out,
Well, let's
and that's what we want to
find out.
study.
Let's
But
find out.
Right.
Cluster systems are great, let's say, for if you develop a condominium, you develop a shopping
Right.
center.
Or even a
Develop-
neighborhood development.
Yes, exactly, they will develop, that's what these are meant for. But they are not really meant for individual.
But let's see what the study says.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Public comment? Quick questions, thoughts?
Okay.
Anybody else in the commission?
The only thing I would
Yeah.
add, and when we're kind of listing
Right.
technology as other, but perhaps adding permeable reactive barriers into this discussion as well
Right.
is really important. It's a new technology, it's just
Uh-huh.
being used, so I don't know if we want to outline that as well, but just another
Okay,
new technology to add.
right. So Laura, since you were so helpful in the last month on getting this written up, can you take the notes from tonight and
Redo this.
redraft this and get this around to the members?
Yeah, how's it gonna change though? I mean.
I think some of the comments that were made, yeah.
What not?
Yeah. I mean, Jesse took notes, I know you have notes always, so,
I have notes.
yeah, Eduardo
Your
has notes.
notes up there?
Yeah.
I have
I
notes.
did, okay. Eduardo's notes.
Yeah.
All
Joe has
right.
notes, so if you could take that and,
I will, and I'll run
combine
it by
it.
you before. and-
yeah,
okay.
so I'd like to move this, and then I'll get it around to everyone on the commission, and then if that's okay, we will try to take it to the trustees next month and start to get this process underway.
But can we agree on a name for this study, please? With just-
You will be responsible for brand.
No, I don't want to be
branding.
responsible. I want water, wastewater management.
Water management.
Water management.
Water, wastewater management.
Right.
Water/wastewater management.
Right.
like slide.
Is that
Right.
fine?
No,
Yeah,
forget
right.
it.
Water pollution control, many times, many
Right.
jurisdictions, they call it the wastewater pollution
Right,
control.
right.
Wastewater pollution control, that's
Yeah.
good.
Okay.
Water, wastewater, pollution
No,
control.
forget the
Wastewater
water.
pollution control.
That's what we want. Wastewater pollution control.
And so as a
Walk. Walk.
I don't like that. It's not broad enough.
All
You
right,
gotta have
we'll
water
think
in
about
there.
it. Well,
And so
let's-
as a
let's
final
think
note
it.
for our meeting, because I'm a great believer in democracy, I want to remind everybody that there is a debate tomorrow at the beautiful Southampton Arts Center.
Oh, is there?
Yep. And,
Joe, you gonna be there? Okay. Jesse, you gonna be there?
I'll be there.
All right.
And then I would strongly encourage everyone to vote on the 21st, is that correct?
Yeah,
On the 21st.
At the cultural center.
Yeah, about half of the people in the village vote. It would be great to see everybody vote, so
But there's going to be
please get out and vote.
What
The
time
ra-
is
the
this
radio-
debate?
5 o'clock.
5.
And the radio station is sponsoring also another debate a week from Friday.
I didn't know that. Right.
Oh, who
Which
is?
radio
The
station?
radio station?
WVBU.
Okay. So I'm
You,
encourage
you
everyone to
know,
get
it's
involved.
funny that you
Yeah.
mentioned radio. I had a, are we done?
Okay. Yep. Any, Dad?
I have one comment.
Yeah.
That'd be great, yeah.
Hi, Kimberly Allen. So your suggestion to really understand the problem is the way to go. We've had a lot of issues come up, and as you mentioned, soil, sediment, geese, fertilizers, pesticides, runoff. Every time you turn around, there's something new coming onto the list. So understanding the problem and not jumping to a solution is a really clever approach. Again, I'm just one person speaking in the capacity of a resident as well as I'm sure the trustees will agree with that. I think your other portion, which is where will we be in 20 years, is equally important because we can't just look for the here and now. And then your collective, we're making collective learnings now, and you're right, Bob. I mean, others, we should really be looking at community-wide solutions across Long Island. Some of those are already taking place with the Peconic Estuary Project. It's a group of people, of mayors, supervisors across all the towns on Long Island that are looking at all the critical impacts to our estuaries to a large degree because of climate change and rising waters. So I think we have a lot of opportunity as a community and as an island to learn from each other. The only thing I'll add is the village understands we have a problem, and I think to start really understanding where is this flux coming from, which is, I'm not a scientist, but as it was explained to me by, a geothermal scientist the other day, it's really understanding where the bad stuff is coming from. And we're working with Stony Brook, and the mayor will be discussing this at the next board meeting, but to put two telemetry buoys onto Lake Agawam that will pick up the properties that are currently present and allow us on a continuous basis, working with the town trustees as well, to really understand what we have in there on a real-time basis. And second of all, we've met with a few folks that have advanced scientific underground metric systems. They're like, I guess you could say, permeable barriers, but they measure what's coming in, and you put a few of those around the lake, and you can actually see maybe we're getting impacts, Bob, to your point, from the homes on Meadow Lane. We're all suspect with regards to it coming from, obviously, the most dense area, but we really need to pinpoint that. So your suggestions are good.
Comments?
And the suggestion of creating a committee from all the neighboring villages and towns?
Yeah,
Is
it's a
it-
really good idea.
Should we contact the mayors and?
Yeah, it really is a good
together?
idea, I think. And then
So we
understand
can-
what
yeah.
everyone's doing.
Right, and then we can everybody go
Yeah.
forward and, create a
Right.
process for all of us.
Right.
Are we going to do an RFP then? Are we going to?
Hopefully,
Yeah.
but that's ultimately the trustees will decide,
Yeah.
but that's,
Okay.
yes, I hope so. Look, it's funny, we served as a think tank, I think, in some ways, because the mayor of West Hampton Beach, as many people know, sat through all our hearings on the sewer and then walked out and said that she wanted to do something for West Hampton Beach. So we've served that role, but I
found a way.
yeah, she found a way. But I think at this point, people know so much more
Yeah, they do.
than we knew at the time. So
And the county has really stepped up. I really want the county
Right.
has really stepped up.
yeah, the county has stepped up where it was really like,
Right, and the town,
Very
and the
close
town as
before.
well,
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to mention one other thing. Because of the July 4th holiday next month, our meeting will not be on July 4th.
Oh, good.
So we're going to try to figure out another date. I know the trustees meeting is the next Thursday, so we'll not be that. But we're going to try to figure out another date for next month.
Why don't we have the trustees move?
What time do they meet? 6:30?
6.
6?
So, okay, so with that, unless there are other comments, close the June meeting.
Okay.
Okay.